Well, good afternoon, everyone. Senator Cornyn, who, as you know, I asked to be the point person on our side to see if we could come to an outcome after these horrible school shootings. And his teammates indicated, as you have reported, a coming together behind a framework which hopefully can be turned into legislative language and passed. For myself, I'm comfortable with the framework, and if the legislation ends up reflecting what the framework indicates, I'll be supportive.
Washington Democrats have been wrong about inflation from the very beginning. Notwithstanding our efforts to try and convince them that pushing $2 trillion out into the economy was going to be inflationary and create lots of havoc in our economy, they went ahead and did it anyway. And so what we're witnessing now are the effects of that, and the numbers last week were pretty sobering. 8.6% inflation, highest in 40 years. Food increased by 11.9%, the biggest, largest increase year over year since 1979. And gas prices, for the first time ever, now exceed $5 a gallon. That is what the Democrats' stewardship and management of this economy have given to the American people. They seem to think that the best way to address this is to double down, spend more federal dollars, $5 trillion in a so-called Build Back Better plan, which hopefully cooler heads on their side will eventually prevail, and they'll dispense with that idea. But we have a very different vision about how to get the economy growing, expanding, get inflation under control. And it really consists not of more big government, but really of allowing the American people to keep more of what they earn, allowing for free markets to work, a light regulatory touch, and providing incentives for oil and gas production in this country to get energy back online. We want to communicate that to the American people, and one of the challenges that we're facing is that there are some of these platforms, I'll use Google as an example, that have been discriminating against some of the content that's being put out. In the 2020 election, there was a study done, independent study done recently, that suggested 70% of Republican emails went to spam in the 2020 election, compared with about 8% of Democrat emails. So I'm filing a bill today and have all the Republican leadership and a lot of our colleagues on board that would go after and prohibit these big platforms from censoring or discriminating against political emails. I'm hopeful that we'll get support for this, obviously. This is a big problem, and we need more transparency out of these social media platforms, more accountability, and we want to make sure that they have to disclose their practices and that they are not discriminating against any political party or political candidate or any political emails that are out there. And that's certainly what we've seen in the past. We hope to change that, and this legislation is a start.
Well, there's more bad news this past week for American families who are struggling to get by in the Joe Biden economy. Gas prices, highest ever in the history of the United States, today over $5 a gallon on average across the country. The inflation numbers that came out last week were actually even worse than the experts anticipated. And while the inflation numbers are high, it's even higher than that for people going to the grocery store. When you go buy things that normal people buy, I was at the grocery store in Wyoming buying hamburger, eggs, milk, soup, all of those things are up much higher than the average rate of inflation. So people really are struggling. They are having a hard time just keeping up with where they were last year. It's costing them a lot more to do that. So they feel really crushed now in this Biden economy. And what did the Democrats had to say about it? Well, they have two different responses. One is surprise, and the other is smug superiority. And the surprise came from the Secretary of Treasury last week when she was in the Finance Committee, and she said she was surprised at how negative people feel about the economy, and amazed about the pessimism that was out there. You're talking about people in the Democrat Party, tone deaf, tin ear on all of this stuff, failing to see the suffering that the American people are living with right now. And reports are out that gasoline could be approaching $6 a gallon this summer. So what does the senator from the Democrat Party, who is the chair of the Democrats' Policy and Communications Committee, had to say, which to me makes them the spokesman for the party? Last week in the Finance Committee, she said it didn't matter to her how high gas prices went because she had an electric car. So that is the spokesman for the Senate Democrats, the chair of the Policy Committee, saying, you don't like the high cost? Tough. Buy yourself an electric car. Now, the fact that the senator is paid 3 times the average income of an American, and an electric car costs more than what most Americans make in a year, that's lost on the Democrats completely. We have sky-high gas prices, sky-high food prices, and the Democrats still want to keep American energy in the ground and are blocking energy for the American people. The American people can't afford to pay the price for food or for gas, and the Democrats need to be made to pay the price come November.
Well, we had a good discussion today of these mental health and violence and gun issues led by Senator Cornyn, who's worked to try to put a package together that might help address these concerns. Obviously, the mental health component would be a big part of that. I think everybody in our conference, and I believe every member of the Senate at some point has said, well, these problems at some fundamental level are the failure of a mental health delivery system for that system to work. But we also talked about school safety. We talked about the importance of having access to juvenile records for young gun buyers, like the person in Uvalde who on his 18th birthday went to have a background check to buy a gun, and since you have no earlier records than 18 available, it's like that person was born that day on his 18th birthday, and of course he passed the background check because he has no background legally and officially, no matter what his juvenile records might have suggested. That's part of putting this package together, but we're working hard to see where we can get a package that will move these issues forward, that the Senate can have a significant vote on, and I think that work continues, and hopefully we'll begin to see language by the end of this week or early next week.
Well, we hit a few new records this last week. Of course, inflation is at another 40-year high. And we had another record with gas prices hitting $5 a gallon in most areas across the United States. So, you know, Iowans, Americans are really facing a very difficult time. I had a fertilizer roundtable. Of course, it's Iowa. Agriculture is king. And at that roundtable in Iowa, we talked about the input prices that are affecting our farmers. And one of the farmers shared that fertilizer, the topic of the conversation, had gone up 300%. So while commodity prices are good, input prices are not. And it is killing our farmers, our ranchers. And as we're talking across the 99 county tour, inflation still is the #1 issue. And so this was referenced earlier by Senator Barrasso. But Janet Yellen came in front of the Americans, and I'll give you the full quote. Here's part of it right here. The Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said, "It's amazing how pessimistic Americans are about the economy, given that we have the strongest labor market we've had in the entire post-war period." Wow! Janet Yellen, yes, Americans may have received a pay increase recently, but you know what happens when you have inflation? That means the increase in your pay is going towards things like the higher cost of gasoline and other goods that are costing more this year than they were last year. So Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary, ma'am, I'd love to invite you to Iowa. Come spend a day in the life of everyday Iowan and see what they're experiencing at the grocery store and at the gas pump. And I guarantee you she won't be so flippant with the American people. Again, it's this elitist attitude that's coming from the left when Americans and Iowans, who are some of the hardest hit by inflation, are facing really tough times. So come on, folks, let's start putting in place some good policies. That means this president and his administration, they need to unleash American energy to bring those costs at the pump down. They should get big regulators off the backs of small businesses. And of course, then they should be shifting their focus. I've heard again that the Build Back Better plan, or what we call reckless tax and spend, has popped up again with some of the Democrats. We need to stop that. Let's get back to good common sense policy, and let's not be so flippant about the hardships Americans are facing.
So as we know, last week we saw the CPI at 10.8%, or 8.6%, and PPI at 10.8% this week. Now, how does that apply to a Floridian? Number one, we have people that have never gone to a food bank before they're going to food banks. We have people that retired. There's a lot of people come to Florida retired. They're going back and looking for jobs because they can't afford their costs. We see wages are never staying up with inflation. We see people postponing their vacations. So this is having a devastating impact to normal families all across my state. The Biden administration is just tone deaf. This is something I held up last October. Gas prices hit their highest level since 2014. When will we get a break? Look at gas, $3.79. So gas is up now over $1.25, and the Biden administration has done nothing. They've done nothing to make sure we have more oil and gas drilling in this country. They've done nothing to get food prices lower. Matter of fact, they've done nothing to solve the baby formula shortage. This is an administration that doesn't understand the needs of American families. Joe Biden has no clue what to do. He's never struggled financially in his life. He came into this world with a wealthy family. He's been taken care of by the federal government for 50 years. He has never struggled.
Leader McConnell. Leader McConnell.
Chad.
Good afternoon. You say you support this framework here. How important is it to signal to other Republicans, if you support this framework, that maybe they should come along? We've heard from some who just don't want to touch any sort of bill because of their concerns about the Second Amendment. We've heard about some civil libertarians who are concerned about red flag laws. How important is it for you to, say, I'm for this framework, but if they're resistant to that change?
Well, I think this is an issue each member is thoroughly familiar with and can make an evaluation of what their position ought to be based upon the views of their states. I would add that Senator Cornyn unfolded a poll today in his presentation of gun owners only, just people who own guns, and support for the provisions of the framework is off the charts, overwhelming. I think if this framework becomes the actual piece of legislation, it's a step forward on a bipartisan basis, and further demonstrates to the American people that we can come together, which we have done from time to time on things like infrastructure and postal reform, to make progress for the country.
Back in December, you told us you were interested in what the January 6th committee was doing. You'd be watching it, that the public should see what they found. I'm curious if you have been watching and what you make of what the committee has found so far.
I don't remember saying that I would be watching.
You hold the quote if you like.
I'm focusing on what we're doing here in the Senate, and I think the most important thing we're doing at the moment is the Veterans Bill and the issue forward on these violent crimes we've witnessed.
Leader, thank you. You expressed that you're satisfied with the framework as it exists. Not in that framework is a provision someone wanted to raise the age to buy assault-style weapons to 21 years old. Why should Americans who are 18 years old not be allowed to buy cigarettes, which is something you support, that
Good try. I've already told you my view of the framework. If it leads to a piece of legislation, I intend to support it. I think it's progress for the country. And I think the bipartisan group has done the best they can to get total support. And the background check enhancement for that age group, I think, is a step in the right direction.
Just on the January 6th hearings, it's come out that a number of people who were close to the former president at the time were urging him to, just telling him that the election fraud claims were wrong with Bill Barr. Should they have come out and more forcefully speak out against it? And should you have done the same in the aftermath of November 3rd?
Yeah, as I said earlier, Manu, I'm focusing on what we're doing here in the Senate. You all have plenty of news to cover over on the House side. Thank you.
Leader McConnell in the Middle East.